You know how it's a running theme on this channel that I build something and then ruin it with a water effect that goes sour? I might have done it again, and on something that was destined to be my new favorite little project. So, will our brave adventurer throw in the towel or find a way to recover the project? Stay tuned to find out. So my good friends at Archvillain Games have an incredibly cool theme this month, the Affliction Outbreak, which is full of nasty sewer-dwelling vermin miniatures. When it came time to build something with them, I was at a bit of a loss, not because I couldn't come up with an idea, but because with this set, there was several ideas I wanted to do. I couldn't easily pick the one mini I wanted to work with as there were just too many cool ones that would make for a great little scene. When it came time to make my print, well, I still hadn't picked one, so I just printed out a bunch of them. I honestly just wanted to paint them all, but print more of them, paint a whole bunch of them, and make a little warband or something out of them, even though I don't have a need for that. But in the end, I did come to the conclusion that I wanted to do a little tiny vignette diorama type build, and the model that I seemed to be the most drawn to was this little bomb-throwing model. He's just super cool, he has so much character, and I felt like I really needed to put him in a scene. I thought he should be, kind of exploring or battling in the sewers, and what better way to do a little sewer diorama than to use a piece of actual sewer pipe. I cut off a chunk of 3-inch ABS. This is the stuff that you would use to plumb a plumbing stack or a toilet, and thought about the story that could be taking place in this sewer with this little rat guy in this one moment in time. Now, if I had him standing on the bottom, I thought he would be too low in the scene, and maybe the sewage would be too deep and it would obscure too much of this really cool model. So I came up with the idea of having him standing on a little ramshackle wooden raft, kind of just floating along in the sewage, balancing himself and about to throw one of his gnarly bombs. Using some wood coffee stir sticks, I set to work building his little tiny raft. And because it was such a small thing to build, I could put a lot of effort into really making that wood grain pop out. This is a tedious task on real wood, so I don't like doing it on large builds, but for this little thing, it's totally worth the simple effort. For ease of painting, I opted to glue little Rat Boy here right to the raft at this stage so I could just paint it all at the same time and not have to wreck either of them when trying to glue them together later after paint. With a little double-sided foam tape on my favorite handle, he was ready to prime and put aside while I worked on the tunnel. I wasn't entirely sure how I wanted to do this tunnel. It was a pretty small tube, and because the model would be floating on his little raft thingy, I figured it wouldn't have the space to do like a walking platform or anything like that. And it would just be like a straight up tunnel. What it did need though were little embellishments to help set the scene and tell the story. My first instinct was to grab some straws and cut little drainage pipes to be running into the larger area. Right from this moment in the build, I knew I had to do this simple element so that I could later use it to have like water effects pouring out of, which would be a small but highly impactful detail. I really contemplated how to deal with the back of this pipe. Should it be left open so that you could look right through it, kind of making it just like a slice of life from both ends, or should it be closed off? Since I wanted to have another place to mount some extra details, I figured closing off the back would be the best way to go. And I love a good sewer grate, and digging through my bits, I found this little plastic circle that I think I had saved at some point from a roll of Scotch tape. This combined with some plastic mesh would be perfect for a sewer grate. To close off the back, I just grabbed a sheet of plastic card and epoxied it right onto the ABS pipe. While that cured for a few minutes, I cut the plastic mesh to fit it into the little circle, which I could then easily glue to the plastic card with some more epoxy. The nice thing about this plastic card backing is that it's really, really thin. I was able to cut it away really easily, it was nice and flush, and it didn't leave much of a visible seam. But with this back being closed, it needed to be decorated. I didn't just want to have a smooth wall at the back of this sewer, that didn't make any sense. So I felt that, like a simple brick wall would be appropriate. And I decided to use some little foam bricks. This is the kind of the easiest way to go to make it look like this section of tunnel was blocked off with the wall that only had like a steel drainage grate for water to pass through it. Now, thankfully, at some point in the past, former past life Jeremy had pre-made a bunch of small foam bricks. So I could just grab that container and get to work gluing them in place. Which I gotta say was pretty awkward in this little enclosed space, but after some tricky bricklaying complete, I needed a way to finish off the side of the tunnel. Now, I thought about gluing thin bricks all the way around, but the idea of getting in there and doing that was just a big nope. I wasn't up for that, so I thought maybe this could just be like a metal or a concrete sewer tunnel, and I could just, deal with it with paint. But it was too smooth even to be that. It just wouldn't be visually interesting. I wanted some texture for weathering and painting. I figured an easy fix would be a thin stipple coating of some Vallejo texture paste. What I love about this stuff is that it's very, very sticky and it dries really fast. So even a thin coat bonds really well to something like smooth plastic. Basically, it's a glue that dries really hard. And while it's wet, because it's like an adhesive, I could drop in some rubble and bits to the bottom that, would kind of decorate it to look like stuff that collected in the murky waters for many years. I just grabbed some random bits that seemed appropriate for things underwater in the sewer, some broken stones, some little bricks, and, some small barrels. While looking through my bits, I also came across this great little lever that I figured it would be a nice element to add to the wall. Maybe this lever would be the thing that opens the iron grate at the back and what, our little rat guy has to get to as he's throwing bombs to make his exit. With that portion drying, I moved on to painting my gnarly little rat guy. And I approached his paint job knowing that I would be using oil washes. My first try last week with oils was kind of a bust in some ways, but it was also a huge win in others. Even after just testing that one mini with oil washes, I was confident that I could now use some of that knowledge to give this mini a really great look while taking advantage of oil washes. I now know the best way to approach this is simply by blocking out all of the main colors with acrylics first. And with a lot of my recent projects, I've been a lot more comfortable with a fast and loose painting style that relies heavily on the airbrush. So I use this as a kind of opportunity to combine all these new things and ways of looking at painting and to push my comfort level even further by just going ahead and blocking out large areas of this model in just a few colors like gray and browns through the airbrush. For this first base coat, there was no reason things like the rat's feet couldn't be the same base layer of brown as the wood raft, as I knew that later I'd be able to slightly tint them differently using those oil washes. After some really simple airbrushing using just gray paint, white ink, and a raw umber ink, that's it, I actually managed to get them looking pretty good as is. Then I just needed to go in with a brush and a few more specific colors to kind of work on defining different sections of materials like leathers, metallics, and his fur. Even without any washes, I was pretty happy with this paint job. He looked pretty good. It was a low effort and quick application that was fun to do, but it looked pretty darn good. And I was starting to get really excited about how he'd look in his new forever home. When it comes to oil washes, this is literally only the second miniature I've ever done them on. So I'm not an expert. I am just a guy clumsily doing things. But even with my incredibly limited knowledge and experience, oil washes are already something I'm absolutely in love with. They just work the way I want washes to work. They're dark and they're rich in color and they flow into the recesses infinitely better than acrylic washes. And even when used like a freaking barbarian like I am, they still work wonderfully and leave so much room for error, as days later I could just come back in with like a makeup sponge and some thinner and remove it from areas where it's too strong. The hype is real and I've drank the Kool-Aid. I'm so excited to use these washes on larger things moving forward. Now, let's take a minute to appreciate how cool this mini is. This is just a simple paint job, and to me, it looks fantastic. Part of the reason is the excellent sculpt provided by this video sponsor, Archvillain Games. But now you all know that I've fallen in love with 3D printing little bits and miniatures to combine with my hand crafting. I love the ability to print out unique models to use for games or in dioramas, and I found that there's a very small handful of model providers I've come to rely on for the very best models, and Archvillain is one of them. They do amazing themed sets every month that you can get access to by joining their Patreon. It's only $10 a month for a metric butt ton of crazy detailed miniatures in cool themes that you can print off as many of them as you want or need. Their aesthetic is right up my alley. All the models have a kind of like more darker and sinister tone to them, and they're so full of little details and bits that they make for a really interesting looking figure even with simple paint jobs. This is great because if you just want to print out a ton of enemies for your D&D game and slap on a quick paint job on all of them, they're going to look awesome. But if you want to just take one of those models and spend hours and hours doing a really impressive display paint on them, well, the sculpts will give you that great canvas to work on for that too. Another thing I love about Archvillain's models and themes is that they're all really well suited for both tabletop wargamers and role players. The stuff they make could easily find homes as unique proxies in many wargames, just as well as they could find a home in your epic D&D adventure. I'll put a link in the description to their Patreon, so go check them out for yourself. I promise you will not be disappointed. And if you want to get this month's cool theme, these rats, well, you gotta sign up fast because, well, the month is about to end. I approached painting the sewer in basically the same way as I did with the Mini. Well, I really just painted it the way I've been painting a lot of my terrain lately by doing a zenithal highlight, then airbrushing on various inks to tint it. The big difference is that I knew I would also be utilizing those wonderful oily washes. I gotta say, painting inside a little tube like this is pretty tricky. It's hard not to oversaturate the back and or over color the front. But this method with the inks is so damn forgiving that on something like this, it really doesn't matter. You know, like if the inks are too wet, they'll just kind of bleed and blend in together and it'll look totally fine, especially in a sewer. And aside from a little bit of detail work on like the lever, there wasn't much that needed any kind of like hand painting details, so I could just move on to the washes. This was much the same slapdash chaotic wash fest as on the Mini, and I loved every moment of it. The more I unlock these visceral free-form ways of painting, the more I absolutely love painting and find myself actually building things in order to get to paint them, rather than painting simply being like a chore part of the process to get things done. I love these oil washes. Have I made that clear yet? I love them. The only thing I don't like is that they take longer to dry, and I'm a very impatient builder, but it's worth it. Plus, while waiting for things to dry makes you come up with other thematic elements to add to the bill. I started thinking, you know, if our rat bomber dude here was trying to balance on some broken wood in a sewer while throwing projectiles, he'd probably need a way to steady himself and his little raft. So I thought a fun solution would be a little bit of chain. I drilled in like tiny little eyelets to the raft as well as the side of the pipe. Then I could attach some jewelry chain that could later be strung from the raft to the hook on the sewer wall. This chain was really shiny and new and just wouldn't look right, so I had to apply some rust effects. One important thing about this step is that these paints, like basically any paint, is not really going to stick to this bare metal, it'll just run off of them. So to counteract this, I actually hit the metal chain with a little bit of matte varnish first, which acted as a transparent primer, giving the rusty paint something to stick to. I wasn't sure if I could just pour the epoxy and then have this model float on top. It probably would have worked because the epoxy is pretty thick and this was pretty light, but I thought it would be better to, you know, somehow place him in there before the pour. This would be pretty tricky and I'd need some sort of clear acrylic rod to do it. Thankfully, at some point when I was looking on Amazon for makeup sponges, I found these cotton swab things that had clear plastic stems and I bought them just for this sort of situation. It was a bit fiddly, but I managed to glue a little kind of flight rod thing to the bottom of the raft and then glue that into the display. I prepped for the epoxy pour using tuck tape as it's really sticky and it won't let the epoxy pour out. It holds pretty good. But this is where the project that I'd spent almost a week pumping in a lot of effort and excitement into started to go sour. You know, I mixed up some of my favorite go-to dollar store 5-minute epoxy with some isopropyl alcohol to thin it out and make it flow better. And I added in a bit of ink to tint it. Now, I've done this many times before. I've tested it thoroughly. And I've even done it recently in videos. It's a dependable material that hasn't failed me yet the way a lot of other resins have. It's really forgiving when it comes to mixing various substances into it, and with the alcohol, the only downside in the past has seemed to be that it will then take a few hours to fully cure instead of a few minutes. I poured in my mix, and at this point things were looking good. The problem though was that I didn't mix up enough to bring the water level up to the raft. So I quickly mixed up another batch, this time without any ink, just the alcohol thinner just to bring it up to height. And I did this really fast so that I could pour it wet onto wet. Again, this is something that I've done before without issue. I did the exact same thing on my recent swamp terrain. Even seeing the mix go milky white didn't alarm or concern me because it always does that before turning clear again. And in the first few minutes after pouring, it did start to go clear and it was looking really good. But for some weird reason that I don't understand, after about an hour when I came back, it had gone totally wonky and white again. And it seemed to only be the top second layer that did this. It was really strange, but something must have reacted between the two layers of pouring, something with the timing of them. I don't know, but something made it do this. And part of me thought about ways to kind of like justify this weird white layer in the sewer. Or maybe it could look like one of those lardbergs that you see in real sewers. But I knew that there was no leaving this. I mean, for a moment I was devastated and I thought I'd be throwing out this week's efforts, but I really didn't want to. I really liked this piece and I was determined to fix it somehow. Because of the alcohol thinner, the curing epoxy was still kind of soft and rubbery, more like cured silicone. So I took the big risk of just trying to pull it all out. I knew that this could make things worse. It could have just completely destroyed everything. You know, maybe I could have left it in. Maybe it would have turned clear eventually, or maybe I could have like painted it, but no, I just really wanted to get this right. So I started ripping the stuff out, knowing full well that this might actually be the final nail in the coffin ruining this build. But I was really determined and I wasn't in a give up kind of mood. So I spent like 2 hours slowly and methodically pulling out this partially cured, rubbery and still sticky epoxy. It was not fun. And I had to try my best not to damage anything while doing it. But I just kept at it. And eventually, to my surprise, it got to a point where it looked like it would be salvageable. It was still a mess, but it was a sewer. I figured with a little more cleanup, it would be okay. And once I got it cleaned out as well as I possibly could, I grabbed some inks, mixed them up, and glazed on a messy, swampy color on all that garbly, goopy epoxy that was left. And sure, it was a really bumpy mess, and the barrels and stuff that I had put in there were barely visible anymore. But with this ink on it, it looked totally fine for the bottom of a disgusting sewer pipe. You know, it actually looked like it could have been intentional. So feeling very relieved, I got back on the horse and set up to do my epoxy pour all over again. Of course, I was nervous of having this same thing repeat itself, so I eliminated as many things as I could that I thought might have caused the issue. This time around, I didn't do the alcohol thinner and I made sure to do it in one pour. The problem with this is that not thinning the epoxy means it's very thick and doesn't flow easily. But with some coercing and patience and kind of fudging around, I got the thing filled up right to the raft like I wanted, and I anxiously awaited like 5 or 6 minutes for it to cure to find out if there would be a repeat of this failure mess, because I could not clean this thing out again. And I was really happy to see that it wasn't white or milky. It was really bubbly and it was more opaque than I initially wanted, but given that this thing was almost going in the trash a few hours earlier, I considered this a pure and total victory. I was so relieved to be able to add the feature that I first envisioned at the beginning of this project, those clear strips of plastic and epoxy to create running water from those side pipes. Putting a bit of clear water texture on top to add some turbulence to the water was so satisfying after everything that I'd gone through here. And you know what? Once it dried, I was just relieved to see that this thing was actually complete, and while not perfect looking, was pretty damn great. I hope you found this video enjoyable. You know, while I always hope to teach and inspire you in some way, I hope that this video specifically helps to show you that we all screw up. Doesn't matter who we are. We all have things that go bad on a project, and sometimes you just throw in the towel, and that's okay. But sometimes it's worth pulling yourself up and forcing yourself to try to correct the problem. It might not always work or be worth the effort, but sometimes it is. And in this case, it absolutely was. Don't forget to drop me a comment and a like on the video, and to share it with your friends or in your favorite hobby groups. If you want to grab some hobby supplies and don't know what to get, check out my essential equipment page on blackmagiccraft.ca, where I link to all of my most used items. Shopping through that page helps support the channel financially at no extra cost to you. But if you do want to help out the channel in a more significant way and help me keep doing what I'm doing, the best way you can do that is by supporting the channel on Patreon. I'd love to have you as the newest member of the Black Magic Craft Fellowship. That support means the world to me, and it allows me to keep documenting my mistakes and my successes to share with you guys. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you next video.